The alarm on the bridge of the exploration ship Wanderer wouldn't stop beeping. Captain Jake Morrison rubbed his tired eyes and looked at the screen in front of him. A distress signal was coming from somewhere on the planet below. The planet was called Theta 7, and it was supposed to be empty. No colonies, no stations, nothing but rocks and dust. Jake had been flying through space for 15 years. He had seen crashed ships before, dangerous situations, and plenty of things that made other captains turn around and fly away. But something about this signal felt different. It felt urgent in a way that made his stomach twist. "Should we check it out, Captain?" Amy Chen asked from her station. She was his second in command and had been with him for 7 years. She was careful, smart, and didn't take unnecessary risks. If Amy was asking, it meant she thought they should at least consider it. "Run a scan first," Jake said. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The scan results came back quickly. There was a ship down there crashed hard into the surface. The readings showed it was a Vorath transport vessel. Jake felt his mouth go dry. The Vorath were known throughout the galaxy as the most dangerous predators alive. They were tall, powerful, with claws that could cut through metal and jaws that could crush bones like twigs. Every species in the Galactic Empire feared them, even the humans who had been their allies for 70 years. "No life signs," Amy reported. "The crash must have killed everyone on board." Jake stared at the screen for a long moment. The smart thing would be to report it and move on. Getting involved with Vorath business was never a good idea. They had their own laws, their own ways of doing things, and they didn't like outsiders interfering. But that distress signal was still beeping. "Take us down," Jake said. "We'll do a quick search and then report what we find." Amy didn't argue, but Jake could see the worry in her face. She thought this was a mistake. Maybe she was right. The Wanderer landed near the crash site, and Jake suited up with 3 crew members. The planet's air was breathable, but the crash had scattered debris everywhere. Sharp metal pieces stuck out of the ground like deadly flowers. The Vorath ship had hit hard, rolling several times before finally stopping. Its hull was torn open in multiple places. Inside the ship, everything was dark except for the emergency lights that flickered red. Jake's boots crunched on broken glass and twisted metal. The bodies of Vorath warriors lay scattered through the corridors. These were massive creatures, each one standing over 7 feet tall even in death. Their silver-black fur was stained with blood, and their faces were frozen in expressions of shock and pain. Jake had seen death before, but this felt wrong. These were warriors, fighters who conquered entire planets. What could have brought their ship down so completely? They searched through the wreckage for nearly an hour, finding nothing but more bodies and destroyed equipment. Jake was about to call it and head back to the ship when he heard something. A small sound, barely louder than a whisper. It came from the cargo bay at the back of the ship. He followed the sound, his heart pounding. The cargo bay doors were jammed half open, and Jake had to squeeze through the gap. Inside, containers were stacked against the walls, most of them broken open and empty. In the far corner, hidden behind a fallen beam, something moved. Jake pointed his flashlight at the corner and froze. A small creature huddled there, pressed against the wall. It had silver-black fur like the adult Vorath, but it was tiny, no bigger than a medium-sized dog. 4 amber eyes stared at Jake, wide with terror. The creature's body was shaking, and Jake could see dried blood matted in its fur. It made that sound again, something between a whimper and a chirp, and Jake felt his heart break. It was a cub. A Vorath cub, left alone in the wreckage with the bodies of its dead pack. Jake knew the rules. The Vorath had strict laws about their young. Taking a cub away from its people was considered one of the worst crimes someone could commit. It could start a war. It could destroy the alliance between humans and Vorath. It could ruin his career and put his entire crew in danger. The cub made that sound again, and Jake stopped thinking about rules. He slowly approached, keeping his movements gentle and calm. The cub watched him with those 4 amber eyes, too weak to run, too scared to attack. Jake took off his thermal jacket and held it out. The cub sniffed at it, confused by the gesture. "It's okay," Jake said softly, even though he knew the cub couldn't understand human words. "I'm not going to hurt you." He wrapped the jacket around the small creature, carefully lifting it into his arms. The cub was surprisingly light, its body trembling against his chest. It should have bitten him, scratched him, fought with everything it had. Vorath were predators from birth, their instincts telling them to attack anything that wasn't pack. But this cub just pressed its face against Jake's shirt and made that whimpering sound again. Jake carried the cub back through the ship, past the dead warriors, past the broken dreams of whatever mission they had been on. His crew members stared in shock when they saw what he was carrying. "Captain, you can't be serious," Amy said when they reached the Wanderer. "That's a Vorath cub. Do you know what will happen if we take it?" "I know," Jake said. "But I also know what will happen if we leave it. It will die here alone, scared, and in pain." "I can't do that, Amy, I won't. The regulations are clear. We're not supposed to interfere with Vorath affairs. This could be seen as kidnapping. They could come after us. They could come after all of humanity." Jake looked down at the small creature in his arms. The cub was looking up at him with those 4 amber eyes, and Jake saw something there that changed everything. He saw trust. This tiny predator, this creature that should want to tear him apart, was trusting him to keep it safe. "Then they'll have to come through me first," Jake said, and walked onto his ship with the cub still wrapped in his jacket. As the Wanderer lifted off from Theta 7, leaving the crashed Vorath ship behind, Jake sat in his quarters with the cub curled up on his lap. It was sleeping now, exhausted from fear and trauma. Its small body rose and fell with each breath. Jake knew he had just changed his life forever. He had broken laws that were written to prevent exactly this situation. He had taken a Vorath cub, something that could never be forgiven or forgotten. But as he felt the cub's warmth against him and heard its gentle breathing, Jake knew he would make the same choice again. Some rules were meant to be broken. Some lines were meant to be crossed. He had saved a life today. Whatever came next, he would deal with it. Jake decided to name the cub Shadow. The name came to him during the first week, when he noticed the little creature following him everywhere he went. When Jake walked down the corridor, Shadow padded along behind him. When Jake sat in his chair on the bridge, Shadow curled up at his feet. When Jake slept, Shadow climbed onto the bed and pressed against his side, purring in a way that made the whole mattress vibrate. The crew didn't know what to make of the situation. Half of them thought Jake had lost his mind. The other half were curious about having a Vorath on board, even if it was just a baby. Dr. Lisa Hayes, the ship's medical officer, was fascinated. She had studied alien biology for 20 years, but she had never been this close to a Vorath before. "Can I examine it?" Lisa asked Jake one morning. "Just basic health checks. I want to make sure the cub is recovering properly from the crash." Jake agreed, though he stayed in the medical bay the entire time. Shadow didn't like being away from him, and whenever Lisa tried to use her scanning equipment, the cub would whimper and look at Jake with pleading eyes. It took treats and gentle words to keep Shadow calm enough for Lisa to finish her examination. "Physically, the cub is healthy," Lisa reported. "A few old bruises from the crash, but nothing serious. Vorath heal incredibly fast. What's interesting is the behavior. According to every study ever done on this species, Vorath cubs should be aggressive, territorial, and almost impossible to socialize with other species. They're supposed to bond only with their pack and see everyone else as either prey or enemies. But Shadow isn't like that," Jake said. "No, Shadow isn't like that at all. This cub is affectionate, playful, and clearly attached to you. It's like watching a completely different species." Word spread through the ship quickly. Soon other crew members wanted to meet Shadow. Jake was careful about it, always supervising and making sure Shadow felt safe. The cub was shy at first, hiding behind Jake's legs whenever someone new approached. But gradually, Shadow began to warm up to certain people. Lieutenant Danny Moore, who worked in engineering, brought Shadow a rubber ball one day. He rolled it across the floor, and Shadow's 4 eyes tracked it with intense focus. Then the cub pounced, grabbing the ball in its jaws and shaking it like prey. Danny laughed and threw the ball again. Shadow chased it, brought it back, and dropped it at Danny's feet, waiting for another throw. They played fetch for almost an hour. Cook Sophie Palmer discovered that Shadow loved the smell of cooking meat. The cub would sit in the doorway of the kitchen, watching with fascination as Sophie prepared meals for the crew. Eventually, Sophie started giving Shadow small pieces of meat, and the cub would eat them delicately from her hand, always careful not to bite her fingers. But Shadow was still a Vorath, and that meant growing fast. Within 3 months, the cub had doubled in size. Its muscles developed quickly under that silver-black fur, becoming powerful and defined. Its claws, which had been tiny and almost cute, grew into curved blades that could leave deep scratches in metal if Shadow wasn't careful. The cub's jaw strength increased dramatically, and Jake watched in amazement as Shadow bit through a solid steel pipe during playtime, snapping it like a twig. Dr. Hayes ran tests and shook her head in wonder. "At this rate, Shadow will be fully grown in about 2 years. Adult Vorath typically weigh between 300 and 400 pounds. They're built for hunting, fighting, and surviving in the harshest environments. Amy remained skeptical about the whole situation. She liked Shadow well enough, but she worried constantly about what would happen when the galaxy found out what Jake had done. "We can't hide this forever, Captain. Eventually, someone is going to notice that we have a Vorath on board, and when the Vorath High Council finds out, they're going to be furious." "I know," Jake said, "but I'm not giving Shadow up. This crew is its family now." The words proved true 6 months after Jake had found Shadow in the wreckage. The Wanderer was docked at Helios Station for resupply when pirates attacked. 3 ships surrounded them, demanding cargo and threatening to blow holes in the station if anyone resisted. Station security was overwhelmed, and the pirates managed to board several ships, including the Wanderer. Jake was on the bridge when it happened. He heard the sound of cutting torches on the main airlock, then the hiss of the door opening. Shadow was sleeping in the corner, having grown to the size of a large wolf. The cub's head lifted immediately when the alarm started blaring. 3 pirates rushed onto the bridge, carrying weapons and shouting demands. One of them, a large man with scars across his face, pointed a plasma rifle at the crew. "Nobody move. We want your cargo manifest and access to your safe." Jake raised his hand slowly, keeping his voice calm. "Take what you want. Nobody here wants trouble." The scarred pirate laughed. "Smart captain. I like smart captains. They live longer." He started walking toward the computer terminal, but he had to pass close to where Jake was standing. That's when Jake saw the second pirate. A nervous-looking woman with shaking hands point her weapon at Jake's back. Her finger was on the trigger, and Jake could see in her eyes that she was scared enough to shoot. Everything happened in less than 3 seconds. Shadow moved from the corner like liquid lightning. The cub crossed the distance between its resting spot and the nervous pirate before anyone could react. There was a blur of silver-black fur, a sound like ripping fabric, and then the pirate's weapon clattered to the floor. The woman screamed once, then went silent. The other 2 pirates spun around, but Shadow was already between them and Jake. The cub stood as tall as Jake's waist now, and when it opened its mouth, rows of razor-sharp teeth gleamed in the bridge lights. A deep growl rumbled from Shadow's chest, a sound that made Jake's bones vibrate and sent primal fear shooting through his nervous system. The scarred pirate's face went pale. "That's a Vorath." "That's a damn Vorath." Shadow took a step forward, and the 2 pirates ran. They scrambled back through the airlock so fast that one of them tripped and fell, crawling the rest of the way in pure terror. The sound of their running footsteps echoed through the ship, and moments later, Jake heard the pirate vessels detaching and fleeing. Station security arrived 5 minutes later to find the Wanderer's crew shaken, but unharmed. The nervous pirate was alive but unconscious, with deep claw marks across her shoulder. Shadow had been precise, stopping the threat without killing. Jake knelt down next to Shadow, who was still standing guard, still growling softly. He put his hand on the cub's head, feeling the tension in those powerful muscles. "It's okay, Shadow. It's over. You did good." Shadow looked up at him with those 4 amber eyes, and the growling stopped. The cub's whole body relaxed, and then Shadow did something that surprised everyone watching. The Vorath cub pressed its head against Jake's chest and made that same whimpering sound from the day they had met. The sound of a scared child seeking comfort. Jake wrapped his arms around Shadow and held the cub close. "You saved my life," he whispered. "You saved all of us." Dr. Hayes approached carefully. "Captain, that pirate needs medical attention. But I have to say, I've never seen anything like what just happened." Shadow could have killed all 3 of them easily. Instead, the cub showed restraint, used exactly the amount of force needed, and stopped the moment the threat was over. That's not instinct. That's intelligence and choice. Amy was staring at Shadow with new respect in her eyes. "Maybe I was wrong, Captain. Maybe you knew what you were doing after all." Jake stroked Shadow's fur, feeling the cub's heartbeat slow to normal. He knew their time was running out. This incident would be reported. Word would spread. Soon everyone in the galaxy would know about the human captain who had adopted a Vorath cub. The Empire was going to come for them, and when they did, Jake would have to make a choice. Give up Shadow, or stand against the most powerful warrior race in the known universe. Looking down at the cub who had just risked its life to save him, Jake already knew what his choice would be. The video appeared on the Galactic Network 3 weeks after the pirate incident at Helios Station. Someone had recorded Shadow playing with human children at a colony school during a supply stop. In the video, Shadow was gentle and patient, letting the children climb on its back and pull its fur. When one small boy fell down, Shadow carefully picked him up by his shirt and set him back on his feet. The boy laughed and hugged the Vorth cub around the neck. The video went viral across hundreds of worlds. Within days, everyone in the galaxy had seen it. Everyone knew about Captain Jake Morrison and his adopted Vorth cub. The response was immediate and explosive. The Vorth High Council issued a statement within hours. It was broadcast across every channel, translated into every language. The message was clear and harsh. What Jake had done was an abomination. He had stolen a sacred warrior cub, corrupted it with human weakness, and destroyed its chance to fulfill its proper destiny. The council demanded Shadow's immediate return and called for Jake to be tried for kidnapping and crimes against the Vorath people. Human government officials scrambled to respond. The alliance between humans and Vorath had lasted 70 years, built on mutual respect and carefully maintained boundaries. That alliance had prevented wars, opened trade routes, and kept peace across dozens of systems. Now one human captain and one Vorath cub were threatening to tear it all apart. The Wanderer was ordered to dock at the nearest human military station. Jake was told that officials were coming to discuss the situation. When he asked what that meant, the answer was vague but ominous. Discussions, negotiations, solutions that would satisfy all parties. Jake knew what it really meant. They were going to take Shadow away. Ambassador Helen Carter arrived at the station with an escort of 6 armed security officers and 3 diplomatic advisors. She was a legend in political circles, someone who had negotiated peace treaties that everyone said were impossible. She had worked with the Vorth for 30 years and understood their culture better than almost any human alive. But when she sat down across from Jake in the station's conference room, she looked tired and sad. Shadow lay on the floor next to Jake's chair, now weighing close to 200 pounds and standing as tall as Jake's waist. The cub watched the ambassador with those 4 amber eyes, intelligent and aware. "Captain Morrison," Helen began, her voice professional but strained, "I need you to understand the position you've put us all in. The Vorath see what you've done as a fundamental violation of their most sacred beliefs. Their young are raised according to traditions that go back thousands of years. Every cub is trained from birth to be a warrior, to serve their pack and their empire. It's not just their culture, it's their identity." Shadow was dying, Jake said quietly, left alone in a crashed ship with dead bodies. No rescue coming, no pack to return to. What was I supposed to do? According to Vorath tradition, you were supposed to let nature take its course. Their belief is that a cub who survives such a tragedy on its own is strong and worthy. A cub who dies was not meant to continue the bloodline. Jake felt anger rising in his chest. "That's barbaric. That's their way, Captain. And you knew that when you took the cub. You knew there would be consequences." Shadow lifted its head and made a low rumbling sound, not quite a growl but close. The security officers tensed, hands moving toward their weapons. Jake put his hand on Shadow's head and the rumbling stopped. "What do they want?" Jake asked. Helen took a deep breath. "They want Shadow returned immediately. They want you arrested and tried under Vorath law for kidnapping a member of their species. And they want assurances that no human will ever interfere with their young again. And if I refuse, then the alliance breaks. The Vorath have already started pulling their ships from joint operations. They've closed their borders to human traders. If this continues, we could be looking at open conflict within months. Millions of lives are at stake, Captain. Entire colonies could be destroyed." The room was silent for a long moment. Jake could hear his own heartbeat, feel Shadow's warmth against his leg, sense the weight of the decision pressing down on him. "Let me ask you something, Ambassador," Jake said. "Have you watched the videos? Have you seen how Shadow behaves? This cub is gentle with children, protective of its crew, capable of showing mercy even in combat. Every scientific paper ever written about Vorath says that's impossible. They're supposed to be pure predators, incapable of bonding with other species." "I've seen the videos," Helen admitted. "Then you know Shadow is proof that everything the Vorath believe about themselves might be wrong. They're not born killers. They're not locked into one path. They can choose. They can change, and that terrifies them." Helen leaned forward, her expression intense. "Captain, I personally agree with everything you're saying. I think what you've done is remarkable. I think Shadow is proof that we don't understand the Vorath as well as we thought we did. But my personal feelings don't matter. I'm here to prevent a war, and right now you're the only thing standing between peace and catastrophe. Jake looked down at Shadow. The cub was watching him, and Jake could swear he saw understanding in those amber eyes. Shadow knew something was wrong. Shadow knew people were talking about taking him away from Jake. I can't give Shadow up, Jake said. This cub trusts me, protected me, saved my life. If I hand Shadow over to people who see the cub as corrupted and wrong, what kind of life will that be? They'll try to break everything we've built together. They'll try to turn Shadow into something it's not. Then what do you propose? Helen asked. I run. I take my ship and my crew into uncharted space. The Vorath can say whatever they want about me. They can call me a criminal, but they leave everyone else alone. This is my choice, my responsibility. Amy spoke up from where she stood by the door. Captain, we've already discussed this. The crew voted. We're with you, all of us. Jake looked at his crew members, seeing determination in their faces. These people were willing to throw away their careers, their safety, maybe their lives, for a Vorath cub and the principle of doing what was right. Helen closed her eyes briefly, then opened them and looked directly at Jake. I can give you 48 hours before I have to report back to my superiors. After that, warrants will be issued for your arrest. Ships will be sent to bring you in. Use that time wisely, Captain. Are you helping us escape? Jake asked, surprised. I'm giving you information about timeline, Helen said carefully. What you do with that information is your choice. But know this, Captain Morrison. If you run, you'll be branded a criminal by both governments. You'll never be able to return to human space. Your crew will be fugitives, and the Vorath will hunt you wherever you go. I understand. Helen stood up, gathering her things. She paused at the door and looked back at Shadow. For what it's worth, I hope you make it. What you've done is dangerous and reckless and possibly stupid, but it's also brave. And maybe the galaxy needs more people who are willing to stand up for what they believe is right, even when the cost is high. After the ambassador and her escort left, Jake sat alone with Shadow and his crew. They had 48 hours to disappear. 48 hours before they became the most wanted fugitives in two empires. Where do we go? Amy asked. As far from the empire as we can get, Jake said. There are uncharted regions, places where neither humans nor Vorath patrol. We'll find somewhere we can lay low, somewhere we can figure out our next move. Danny Moore spoke up from near the back of the room. Captain, I've been reading about a place called Haven. It's a colony on the edge of known space established by refugees from all over the galaxy. People who didn't fit into the Empire's neat little boxes. No official government, no extradition treaties. If we can make it there, we might be safe. How far? Jake asked. 6 weeks of hard travel through some dangerous space. But if we make it, the Vorath can't touch us there. Jake looked at each member of his crew. This is your last chance to walk away. Once we leave this station, you're all criminals. Anyone who wants to stay behind, I understand. No judgment, no hard feelings, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. They just looked at him with the same determination he had seen before. All right then, Jake said. We leave in 6 hours. Get the ship ready for long-range travel. Stock up on everything we can carry, and say goodbye to your old lives because we're not coming back. Shadow stood up and pressed against Jake's side, and Jake felt the cub's strength and trust. They were about to bet everything on a belief that some bonds were more important than laws, that compassion mattered more than politics, that a life saved was worth any price. The galaxy thought Jake was crazy. Maybe he was. But as he walked back to the Wanderer with Shadow at his side, Jake felt more certain than he had in years. He was doing the right thing. And whatever came next, he would face it with his crew and his adopted Vorath cub. The Empire could whisper all it wanted. Jake Morrison was going to give them something worth talking about. The first month of running was the hardest. The Wanderer jumped from system to system, never staying more than a few hours in any one place. Jake and his crew learned to avoid main shipping lanes, to dock at stations where officials didn't ask too many questions, and to trade with smugglers who didn't care about warrants or bounties. News of their escape spread across the galaxy faster than their ship could travel. The human government issued official arrest warrants for Jake and his entire crew. The Vorath High Council declared them enemies of the Empire and promised rewards for anyone who could capture them alive or provide information about their location. Both governments sent ships to hunt them, but the Wanderer had one advantage. It was a small exploration vessel built for speed and maneuverability, and Jake knew how to fly it better than anyone. Shadow continued to grow during their flight. The cub was now taller than Jake's waist, weighing nearly 250 pounds of pure muscle and predatory power. Shadow's claws had grown longer and sharper, capable of leaving deep gouges in the ship's metal walls if the cub wasn't careful. The creature's bite force could crack reinforced steel, but despite Shadow's increasing physical power, the cub remained gentle with the crew, playful in the rare moments when tension lifted, and fiercely protective whenever danger appeared. They had several close calls with hunter ships. Once, a Vorath patrol vessel nearly caught them hiding in an asteroid field. Shadow had sensed the danger before the sensors picked up the other ship, pacing the bridge and growling softly until Jake ordered an emergency jump. Another time, human military ships cornered them near a trade station and Jake had to fly through a debris cloud that damaged the Wanderer's hull plating. They barely escaped. The crew held together through it all, but Jake could see the strain building. They were tired, scared, and running on hope that was starting to wear thin. Amy's face grew more drawn each week. Danny stopped joking during his maintenance work. Sophie cooked meals in silence, no longer humming the songs she used to sing in the kitchen. It was during their 5th week on the run that they finally reached Haven. The planet appeared on their sensors like a miracle. It was beautiful, with blue oceans and green continents located in a system that was technically outside the borders of both human and Vorath territory. The colony had been established 20 years earlier by refugees from a dozen different species, people who were tired of the Empire's rules and restrictions. According to the information Danny had found, Haven had no official government, no military, and no extradition agreements with anyone. It was a sanctuary for those who didn't fit anywhere else. The Wanderer descended through the atmosphere toward a small settlement built near the coast. As they landed, Jake saw buildings of different architectural styles, reflecting the mixed population. There were structures that looked human, others that were clearly designed by species Jake had never met, and a few that seemed to blend multiple cultures together. A welcoming committee was waiting at the landing pad. The group included humans, several species Jake recognized from the Empire, and 2 creatures he had never seen before. At the front of the group stood an elderly Vorath, leaning on a walking stick carved from dark wood. Jake's hand went instinctively to his weapon when he saw the Vorath, but Shadow's reaction stopped him. Instead of growling or showing aggression, Shadow tilted its head with curiosity. The cub seemed fascinated by this older member of its own species. The elderly Vorath walked forward slowly as Jake descended the ship's ramp. Shadow stayed close to Jake's side but didn't show any fear. Up close, Jake could see that this Vorath was ancient by their species' standards. 3 of its 4 eyes were clouded with blindness and deep scars covered its body, the marks of countless battles, but the creature carried itself with dignity that demanded respect. "So you are the human who adopted one of our young," the old Vorath said in perfect human standard language. Its voice was rough, like stones grinding together, but there was warmth in it that Jake hadn't expected. "I'm Jake Morrison," Jake said, "and yes, this is Shadow." The old Vorath made a sound that might have been a laugh. "My name is Cross. I left the Vorath Empire 40 years ago after I could no longer believe in what we were doing. Many here have similar stories. We are all refugees from the life we were supposed to live." Shadow approached Cross slowly, cautiously. The old Vorath lowered its head, and Shadow sniffed carefully at the elder's scarred face. Then Shadow made a gentle chirping sound, the same sound the cub had made in the wreckage the day Jake found it. Cross touched Shadow's head with one massive paw, surprisingly gentle. "This one has been well cared for. I can see the bond between you clearly. The High Council must be very angry about this." "That's putting it mildly," Jake said. "They want Shadow back and they want me tried for kidnapping." "Of course they do. You have challenged everything they believe about themselves. For generations the Vorath have told themselves that we are born warriors, that violence is our nature, that we cannot be anything else. It is how we justify our conquest, our dominance, our place in the Empire. But here stands Shadow, proof that we are wrong." Cross gestured for Jake and his crew to follow him into the settlement. They walked through streets where different species mixed freely, children of various races playing together, adults working side by side without the rigid hierarchies that dominated the Empire. It was chaotic and disorganized and beautiful. They ended up in a large building that served as a community center. Inside, Cross offered them food and drink, and finally, Jake felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. For the first time in weeks, they were somewhere safe. "Tell me how you came to have Shadow," Cross said, and Jake told the whole story, finding the crashed ship, the bodies of the warriors, the small cub hiding in the cargo bay, the decision to take Shadow instead of leaving the cub to die, the months of bonding as Shadow grew, the pirate attack where Shadow had saved his life, the videos that had exposed them to the galaxy. Cross listened to everything, and when Jake finished, the old Vorath was quiet for a long moment. "You did something remarkable, Jake Morrison. Not just saving Shadow, but giving the cub a choice. We Vorath are taught from birth that our path is predetermined. We are warriors, hunters, conquerors. Those who question this are seen as weak and cast out. But you showed Shadow that there are other ways to live." "I just treated Shadow like family," Jake said. "Exactly. And that is what terrifies the High Council. If one Vorath can bond with humans, can show mercy, can choose peace over violence, then what does that say about all the wars we have fought? What does it say about the empire we have built on the backs of conquered worlds? Your simple act of kindness threatens their entire worldview." Shadow was lying on the floor near Jake's chair, relaxed in a way the cub hadn't been since they started running. Cross watched the young Vorath with his one good eye. "You cannot run forever," Cross said. "Eventually the Empire will find you. When that happens, you will need to make a stand. You will need to show them that Shadow is not corrupted or weak, but simply free to choose its own path." "How do we do that?" Jake asked. "Vorath tradition allows for trial by combat. If Shadow can prove its strength according to our ways, even the High Council will have to acknowledge the cub's right to exist outside the warrior caste. It is the one law they cannot ignore without destroying their own credibility." Amy leaned forward. "You're suggesting Shadow fight another Vorath? That's insane. Shadow has never been trained for formal combat. The cub would be going up against warriors who have trained their entire lives for this." Cross's scarred face showed something that might have been a smile. "True. But those warriors have never fought for something they love. They fight for duty, for honor, for the glory of the Empire. Shadow would fight for family, for the bond with Jake, for the right to be free. That is a different kind of strength." Jake looked down at Shadow. The cub was watching him with those 4 amber eyes, and Jake could see the intelligence there, the understanding. Shadow knew they were talking about important things even if the cub couldn't understand all the words. "I won't let Shadow get hurt," Jake said. "I won't sacrifice the cub to prove a point to the Empire." "Then you will run for the rest of your life," Cross said bluntly. "And eventually they will catch you. The Vorath do not give up and they do not forget. If you want a future for Shadow, for yourself, for your crew, you must face the High Council, and you must do it on terms they cannot refuse." The room fell silent. Jake knew Cross was right, but the thought of putting Shadow in danger made his stomach twist. He had spent months protecting the cub, keeping Shadow safe, making sure nothing could hurt this creature who trusted him completely. But safety was an illusion now. The galaxy knew about Shadow. The Empire wanted the cub back. Running had bought them time, but time was running out. "If we do this," Jake said slowly, "if we challenge the Empire to trial by combat, we do it publicly. We make sure everyone in the galaxy is watching, so that no matter what happens, they can't hide what Shadow has become." Cross nodded. "Agreed, and I will help you. I still have contacts in the Empire, Vorath who question the old ways as I once did. We will spread the word. When the time comes, the whole galaxy will be watching." Jake reached down. The message went out across the galaxy 3 weeks after Jake arrived at Haven. Cross had kept his promise, using his old contacts to spread word through both official and underground channels. The challenge was simple and impossible to ignore. Captain Jake Morrison and Shadow the Vorath would face the High Council at Haven Station, a neutral location in uncharted space. They would submit to trial by combat according to Vorath tradition. If Shadow won, the Empire would leave them in peace. If Shadow lost, Jake would accept whatever judgment the Council demanded. The entire galaxy watched as ships began converging on Haven Station. News crews from hundreds of worlds arrived, setting up cameras and broadcasting equipment. The station's small arena, usually used for sporting events and local competitions, was transformed into a galactic stage. Representatives from dozens of species came to witness what everyone was calling the trial of the century. The Vorath High Council sent War Chief Rax, a massive male who had conquered 3 star systems during his prime. He arrived with a delegation of 20 warriors and enough political power to start or end wars with a single word. The human government sent Admiral Paul Grant, a decorated officer who had fought alongside the Vorath in the border wars. Ambassador Helen Carter came as well, looking tired but determined. Jake stood in the center of Haven Station's main plaza with Shadow at his side. The cub had grown even more during their time at Haven. Shadow now stood nearly as tall as Jake's shoulder, weighing over 300 pounds of muscle and bone and predatory grace. The cub's silver-black fur gleamed under the station's lights, and those 4 amber eyes missed nothing. War Chief Rax stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. He was the largest Vorath Jake had ever seen, standing over 8 feet tall with scars that told stories of 100 battles. When he spoke, his voice carried across the entire plaza. "You have violated our most sacred law, human. You have taken a Vorath cub and raised it outside our traditions. You have corrupted it with your weakness, made it dependent on your kind, destroyed its warrior spirit. That cub should have died with honor in the wreckage of the transport ship, or been recovered by our people and raised properly. Instead, you have created this abomination." Shadow growled at the word abomination. It was a deep, rumbling sound that made everyone nearby take a step back. Jake put his hand on Shadow's head, calming the cub with his touch. "With respect, War Chief, Shadow is not an abomination," Jake said. "This is a living being who deserves the chance to choose its own path. You call it weakness to bond with other species, but I call it strength. Shadow has saved my life, protected my crew, and shown mercy even in combat. Everything your people claim to value in a warrior, Shadow possesses. It has lost its warrior spirit," Rax insisted, his 4 eyes fixed on Shadow with something that looked like disgust. "Then prove it," Jake said loudly, making sure his voice carried to all the cameras, all the witnesses, all the billions watching across the galaxy. "Your traditions allow for trial by combat. Let Shadow face one of your warriors in the arena. If Shadow loses, you can have the cub back and I'll face whatever judgment you demand. But if Shadow wins, you leave us in peace and acknowledge that your beliefs about your own species might be wrong." The plaza erupted in murmurs and whispered conversations. This was unprecedented, a Vorath raised by humans challenging the Empire itself. War Chief Rax stared at Jake for a long moment, then looked at Shadow. The cub stared back, not backing down, not showing fear. Finally, Rax nodded. "Agreed, but understand this, human. The warrior I choose will not show mercy. If your pet falls, it dies. There is no surrender in Vorath combat, only victory or death." "Shadow understands," Jake said, hoping he was right. The next day, the arena was filled beyond capacity. Every seat was taken and thousands more watched from screens throughout the station. Jake stood at the edge of the combat zone with his crew, all of them wearing expressions of worry and determination. Shadow waited beside him, calm and focused in a way that reminded Jake of meditation. Dr. Hayes had run every test she could think of. Shadow was healthy, strong, and as ready as the cub could be. But she pulled Jake aside before the match and whispered, "Captain, you know Shadow has never been trained for this kind of formal combat. Whatever happens in there, it's not your fault. If Shadow loses, it's my fault for putting the cub in this situation," Jake said. "But I believe in Shadow. I've seen what this creature can do when protecting the people it loves." The Vorath warrior who entered the arena was named Krell. He was young by their standards, probably only 5 or 6 years old, but already a proven fighter. Krell had been trained from birth in the traditional ways, taught to fight before he learned to speak, raised to see combat as the highest calling. He was smaller than War Chief Rax, but still outweighed Shadow by at least 50 pounds. His muscles rippled under dark fur, and his 4 eyes burned with the confidence of someone who had never lost a fight. Shadow entered the arena from the opposite side, and the contrast was striking. Krell moved like a machine, all efficiency and practiced motion. Shadow moved like water, fluid and natural, guided by instinct rather than training. The crowd grew silent as the 2 Vorath faced each other across the sand. War Chief Rax raised his hand. "This combat is witnessed by the High Council and the gathered species of the galaxy. The rules are simple. Fight until one cannot continue. Surrender is permitted but rarely given. Victory goes to the last one standing." He dropped his hand. "Begin." Krell attacked immediately, exploding forward with speed that seemed impossible for something his size. Shadow dodged to the side, avoiding the charge by inches. Krell spun and slashed with his claws, drawing first blood across Shadow's shoulder. The crowd gasped, but Shadow didn't panic. Instead, the cub circled, watching Krell with all 4 eyes, learning from every movement. When Krell charged again, Shadow was ready. The cub ducked under the attack and struck back, claws raking across Krell's ribs. Not deep, but enough to draw blood in return. The fight continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Krell was faster, more skilled, trained in techniques that Shadow had never seen. But Shadow had something Krell didn't: purpose. Every time the trained warrior landed a blow, Shadow got back up. Every time Krell knocked the cub down, Shadow stood again. Jake watched with his heart in his throat. He wanted to stop the fight, to run into the arena and pull Shadow out of danger, but he knew that would doom them all. Shadow had to finish this. The turning point came when Krell made a mistake. He overextended on an attack, putting too much weight forward. Shadow saw the opening and took it, slamming into Krell's side and sending the trained warrior tumbling. They both went down in a tangle of limbs and fury, rolling across the sand, biting and clawing. When they separated, both Vorath were bleeding from multiple wounds. Krell was panting hard, his four eyes showing surprise for the first time. Shadow was hurt worse, favoring one leg, but those amber eyes were still focused and clear. They circled each other, both looking for an opening. Then Krell made his final charge, a desperate all-out attack designed to end the fight. Shadow waited until the last possible second, then moved. Not away, but forward, meeting Krell head-on with a collision that shook the arena floor. They grappled, jaws snapping for throats, claws tearing. Jake couldn't see who was winning. The crowd was on its feet, shouting. Then suddenly it was over. Shadow stood with jaws locked around Krell's throat. The trained warrior was pinned on his back, helpless. Shadow could kill with one bite. Everyone in the arena knew it. One squeeze of those powerful jaws and Krell would die, but Shadow didn't bite down. Instead, the cub held the position for 3 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, making it clear that the fight was over, that Shadow had won, but choosing not to kill. Then Shadow opened its jaws and stepped back, releasing Krell. The arena was silent. Krell lay on the sand, breathing hard, staring up at Shadow with shock in his four eyes. War Chief Rax stood slowly in his observation box, his expression unreadable. Shadow turned away from Krell and walked across the arena to where Jake stood. The cub was limping badly, bleeding from a dozen wounds, exhausted to the point of collapse. But Shadow made it all the way to Jake before finally sitting down heavily in the sand. Jake jumped the barrier and ran to Shadow, dropping to his knees beside the injured cub. He wrapped his arms around Shadow's neck, feeling the cub's heartbeat, the warmth of its breath, the trembling of muscles pushed beyond their limit. "You did it," Jake whispered. "You beautiful, brave, amazing creature. You did it." War Chief Rax descended to the arena floor and walked slowly toward them. Jake tensed, ready to defend Shadow even though he knew it was hopeless. But Rax stopped a few feet away and stared at Shadow for a long moment. Then War Chief Rax did something unprecedented in Vorath history. He bowed. A deep formal bow that acknowledged an equal, a warrior worthy of respect. "You have proven yourself, young one," Rax said, his voice carrying across the silent arena. "You carry the strength of our people, the courage of our warriors. But you also carry something we lost long ago. The ability to show mercy, the ability to choose victory without death." Cross walked into the arena, moving slowly but with purpose. "The old